career spectrum. Thanks, Pat. More towards the career spectrum of our work. But again, I want to make sure that many of the folks that I see on this call who've really helped shape the thinking and the ideas that we're going to share out also get a lot of credit, because my role is really as a facilitator and coordinator. So I get to listen to and share out a lot of good ideas. And so that's what we're going to do here today, and think about how we can take those even further. So I'll go ahead and start that screen share. Great. And again, I'll just put a call out there. If anyone does have a cell number for Janelle and can reach out to her, that would be much appreciated. And if not, we will move ahead. And again, a lot of this thinking and these slides are pieces that she has put together. So I want to give her credit for that. Some of our goals today are going to be to link cultural identity and development to post-secondary success. So making the connection between those things, and then linking post-secondary success to healthy students and healthy communities. We'll also share out an assessment tool. This is a tool that Janelle has put together in her doctoral research. And since I'm referring to her so frequently, she is currently the superintendent at Mount Edgecombe High School, and recently completed her doctorate on helping Alaska Native students transition to and succeed in life after high school. And then we'll also share out a sneak peek at a framework that a number of us have been working on to help more students make that bridge. I also want to give a caveat, put out there that when I say college, I'm thinking most broadly in that term. So not just that 4-year baccalaureate degree that we think of, or bachelor's degree that we think of, but 2-year degrees, certificates, military training, as we sometimes call it, SOS, something after high school, or post-secondary. So all of those terms we may use interchangeably. And I just want folks to have that in mind today. We're also going to talk a bit about identity and where identity comes from and the role that it plays in helping our students make those transitions. So identity comes from a number of places, from our experiences, our community. It is something that helps form us. And Janelle put together these great slides in this analogy around the individual mindset or culture versus a collectivist culture. And so she uses the bear to represent the individual, and the wolves here to represent a more collectivist approach. And we often see how this shows up differently in our schools. Zaretta Hammond has written extensively about this, but from a more Western or individualist mindset, we celebrate rugged individualism, and we make our own choices, where collectivist cultures, Alaska Native cultures, tend to be more collectivist, are more interdependent and community-minded, more of that wolf mindset.
Emily, I want to interrupt you here, and I know that Janelle just arrived, and I just want to make it clear to everyone that this was not Janelle's fault for coming in late. This was mine. So she's here, and I really appreciate it, and sorry for the confusion. So
no, I also have, yeah, thank you so much for everybody's patience, and gosh darn, if COVID wasn't ruling my life, I probably would have caught it too. So Emily, I'm sure you've already got us started in a great way, and just talking a little bit about this slide. You already talked about it, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, well, why don't you go ahead and jump in? I gave kind of a quick summary.
Yeah. So probably a lot of you are familiar with Serta Hammond's work, but I think it's so applicable to us in Alaska, particularly if you've been working with Alaska Native populations, because those cultures tend to be more on the collectivist side of her spectrum there. And then the reality of schools is they tend to mirror more that individualism side of the spectrum, of that kind of independent, rugged individualism. Describe yourself mostly on your individual traits, as instead of the collectivism where it's more about community and family roles. I really like to use kind of in Alaska, that bear and wolf. We kind of understand those animals. Bears tend to be pretty individualistic and have kind of their own goals, and wolves have a collectivist society. So if you go to the next slide. Schools, as I described, have an ideology in itself. And, if you're working in schools, you kind of know that. And it mirrors that white middle class, that in kind of industrial revolution kind of individualism mentality. And this impacts, how that our schools have that cultural view. Next slide. And you can see this when I'm thinking about college readiness in particular, or just really, and when I talk about college readiness, it's about post-secondary. We can use the term college to refer to, military goals as well as vocational goals. But when we talk to kids about their future, as schools, we tend to be really quick to say, what do you want to be? Or how much money do you want to make? Or really these individualistic or status related questions. But simply shifting our view to a more collectivist view could help us get to questions that really help kids find their own purpose. So just imagining shifting some of those questions to, how could you make a difference for your community? What will going to college mean for your family? How might your family support you if you're in college? Helping them think a little bit more about their relationships and this new future. So next slide. So thinking about those wolves and bear, what we tend to have in school is many of the people teaching in school have that same kind of value that schools have had, or tend to be on that individualism. And so we start saying, gosh, you guys, come on, be like me, go to college. And when our wolves out there start to hear that and they think, oh, if I do want to go to college, what we don't want is for them to start thinking, I have to be like this other person in order to go to college. So if you switch to the next slide, what we want to shift is our ability to say, go to college, be like you. You're going to need to find a way to stay and remain how you are and who you are in this new environment. So next slide. In some of my research that I did, I came across Huffman and his 4 stages of transculturization. And every time I've presented this to a group of folks that have some Alaska Native student or Alaska Native adults, someone comes up and says, this slide resonates to them. And that is this idea, he kind of looked at kids, adults that had been successful in college that were not just Alaska Native, but indigenous to the United States. And they had a pretty good pattern of describing this first feeling of feeling alienated. So they go onto campus and they feel out of place. They feel like, this isn't for me, I don't fit here. If they stick around and they have this successful transition, the next stage is self-discovery. And that's where this place doesn't feel like me, but I have some personal strength from my culture and that I can draw from that. The next stage is realignment, when they start to be able to kind of relate to both their native and the mainstream cultural settings, and they use culture as an emotional anchor. So they recognize, ooh, this is a setting I got, I might need to do some code switching, but who I am is my anchor. This is what I take with me to feel comfortable in that environment. And finally, the stage is participation. And that's where people feel comfortable using their culture and heritage as a source of strength, sharing that with others, and feeling that full participation. There's a woman named Williams who was calling a shift, this shift for us to start thinking about shifting from culturally responsive to culturally affirming. And if you think about these stages as high schools, what we can do, I think this is the really exciting thing, is if this is the stage folks go through, and if they get to that final stage, they're much more likely to be successful. Couldn't we do some work to help them move out of alienation, even right here in high school, and get them a little kickstart into that self-discovery and maybe even realignment before they head off to college? So next slide.
So in this component, we were thinking that we might give you all some time to dig into some of the information yourself as well. Janelle just did a lovely job sharing out about how thinking about culture can impact a student's future. We have also been looking at Alaska's data to say, how are we doing in our post-secondary outcomes? What's happening in our state? So we wanted to give you all a little bit of time to look at this information together. And then I think we were going to do some breakout groups. If Pat, is that a possibility? I didn't give you much of a heads up on that.
Let me see here.
Okay. It's not a requirement, but if we could break out into 5 or 6 groups and have 5 minutes to flip through the next 5 or 6 slides. The slides are in the chat, so if you're able to click on that and open it, and you can start here as a group and flip through again the next set of slides through number 17. Have some different nuggets of data that have been put together by the Alaska Postsecondary Commission on Education. I'm sorry, Alaska Commission on Postsecondary Education. I think I almost have that down pat now. Yeah. So that's mostly where a lot of this information came from. Pat, is that a possibility?
Yeah, we can go into 5 rooms. Will that work?
That sounds great. And do folks maybe you can give me some sort of reaction if you were able to open up the slides, just so we know that a few of you have that open. Great. Okay, thanks. That sounds good. It's about 5 minutes. Our hope is that you can come back with 1 or 2 observations to share out. So take a look, discuss among your group, and come back and say the thing we noticed was. Any questions? Okay, let's do it.
Here we go. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to get my stuff out of the way. Were you all able to open the slides? Can you see the slides?
Here is boarding school, and it's really hard to get the FAFSA done with the students being in one community and the parents in another community without internet.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We're hoping to take just a couple minutes to hear what you observed. What was a key point that you noticed? And maybe if you're willing to speak up for your group, you could just give us a signal or a hand raise. Otherwise, I'll cold call. Thank you so much, Lubeth.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was me because I wasn't looking at everybody's. We were just talking about how the graduation rates and the not entering college isn't super surprising due to a lot of the lack of rigor of mentality of the communities and the teachers that end up at some of the rural communities. And then Grace was also talking about those that don't have access to internet to complete a lot of forms and stuff for college are now all online, and many places in Alaska still don't have great internet, and that poses a huge challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, so you noticed that the outcomes, which were, I guess when I see those outcomes, I feel like I want better for our kids. That's what it inspires in me. And it sounds like you were thinking about what some of the barriers and problems are, which, Alaska is unique. We do have those extra special, we're extra special in so many ways. What else did folks notice? Can we have maybe 2 or 3 other folks share out what they noticed in that information?
We noticed the 0% for the doctorate rate for Alaska Natives, and that was really shocking. A few of us know a few Alaska Native people that have doctorates, but we're assuming that it wasn't enough to make it to the 1% of the population, and that's why it came out 0. And then Gilbert had a really interesting perspective that he's witnessed. Did you want to share that?
No, go ahead. You're doing good.
Okay, well, he was talking about how he knew someone that was Alaska Native and left to get his doctorate and came back and was ostracized for having left to get his doctorate. And so it was an interesting community perspective on that. And we were just wondering if that is something that is also being looked at and studied.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. That is a piece that has been shared, in other settings as well. And I think one of the things that we're hearing as we're talking about this is it's not just about that individual, it's about the broader community, the broader setting, the supports that are there leading up to and after you go off and get that degree. And all of that is tied in together.
Yeah.
Well, that was an observation back in the middle 90s, where I was working in a different community. It was a village upriver, but around here, there's some places that are real strong with, post-secondary, whatever, and others, not at all. So the different aspect of it, it's gotten to be a little bit better, more accepting.
Right.
But-
So I think, an interesting lens to look at those experiences, and I think Gilbert's right, it's probably less of an experience now than in the past or whatnot, but I think it's a reflection of that historical assertion that village and school are different, and they're 2 different places, and these are, And so what we're advocating for now is to present college more of how can it mesh in your community? Where does it fit? Instead of presenting college as what it was for me and my very, Midwest experience, really getting kids to experience or to explore how does that education fit with my community and my people, and not see it and help to bridge that not either or view, but to help kids see how that they don't have to turn their back on one in order to access the other.
So I have an interesting thing is this slide with Alaska has the highest rate of disconnected youth. And this data only goes up through 2019, and it is pre-COVID. And now we're in the middle of COVID, and I work in the college in adult education, and I come across so many students who just dropped out of school with the beginning of COVID and just never went back to school. So it would be terrifying to me to actually see the numbers now in 2022 compared to 2019. I'm not doubting that it's like way, way worse.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective as well. So I think some of the key things that if we were to walk away with this, we'd want to think about that we know that we need more people, more Alaskans with degrees and credentials. I'm sure we can all think about job openings that we'd love to hire someone from Alaska for that position. So we know that need is there. Personally, we know it's there from the data. We know that we have bodies, we have people. And so our challenge is how to help our people, our communities that we care about, connect into those roles and be ready for those roles. So that's our.
Yeah. And Emily, can I add just one more on that as we kind of rethink about this, and how do we combat that historical message of these are two separate? It's not just about our communities and maybe our village communities becoming more accepting of somebody who may come back with a college degree. It's also our academic settings being more open and inviting to education that's happened for years and years and years and is really, really valuable and very academic. And we're starting to see that on large scales, particularly with science. Right now, there's lots coming out where science are going, oh, wow, there's some things Indigenous people have known for a long time that we would have been wise to listen to before now. And so that's where I think it as we start to look at these as not mutually exclusive, that needs to go both ways. And our academic settings need to find those opportunities to authentically bring in Native ways of knowing as academic.
Thanks, Janelle. And I also wanted to acknowledge the really the hard efforts of the work of everyone on this call who is working on behalf of students. And I thought it's interesting that we have created a structure where cost is not the biggest barrier there. My screen should be loading, hopefully, there we go. So actually, and that's in large part thanks to the work of the folks at the Commission on Postsecondary Education. And we're also finding that there is desire there. The COVID experiment that happened this past year revealed that there was students who were interested in the Alaska Performance Scholarship. Eligibility was an issue, and that there's some disproportionate access. But I think just even taking a look at those questions allows us to think about how can we improve our systems. So I just want to acknowledge that even though we don't necessarily have the outcomes we'd all like to see, that there's promise on the horizon and a lot of hard work being put into some of these questions. So, the kind of the how can we do things differently, or how can we tackle this problem? And Janelle started us off by illustrating what an asset culture can be. And it was really fascinating to come across this author, Mandy Savitz-Romer. She's actually going to be speaking at the Alaska CAN conference as well in the beginning of March. So if you want to hear more from her, she'll be there. But across the board, when she looked at college access programs throughout the nation, she found that they were often missing the identity part of college going identity. So this is a common thing that we tell students to make a plan and then give them the how-to to execute it. But if that's not part of your mindset and who you see yourself as, that's a difficult thing to ask of students. So with a lot of help from folks on this call, we've been thinking about, okay, what needs to happen here? What does this map look like? And if we think about post-secondary education, or education as kind of you're running a race of sorts, a marathon, and you need supports all along the way. And you need your directional arrows to help guide you. So we want to think about what needs to be in place along the way to help make sure that students know what the course is and can navigate it and have the encouragement they need to make their way through it. And then we also want to make sure that we're linking that education to the place that they want to be. And that might not be going off to be a professor at a university or working in a big city and getting paid a lot. That might be coming back to their home community and contributing there. So helping make those connections and then making sure that we're really developing the cultural identity as a strength, as well as the academic preparation, the rigor that we heard folks talk about, and then the navigation skills. How do you actually do that thing? How do you get that FAFSA in, especially without internet and parents in far off places? Janelle, do you want to say anything more about this before we move? Okay.
This slide here is, as I've done some of that work, and a lot of mine is specific. A lot of my research has been specific around Alaska Native students, but a lot of the work from Mandy Savitz-Romer is a broader group. But whoever we're looking at, they're a unique kid. And as we described at the beginning of this, culture comes from a lot of places. And so another kind of key piece is, as we may become more and more culturally aware, we also have to be careful and not just say, oh, I've learned this about Native kids, and so now I'm going to assume that's going to be, you. So just thinking about that and continuing to think about culture as an individual thing, and kids are going to be on their own spectrum. And so a real key is getting them to know who they are academically and culturally, and what tools they as individuals need. So next slide. Here's some research, and I'm just going to let you read it to yourself, but really some amazing research about, and again, this is specific to Alaska Native or Indigenous students, that not only is it important for them to learn that cultural identity, the research suggests that they do better in school. That first one would really compared it with kids who approach school from more of a culturally assimilated way. So feeling like, oh, I need to learn all the white ways in order to navigate. But actually kids that were able to draw strength from their cultural identity did better. And the second quote actually said they had higher GPAs. So it's not just feel good, it's about college success. Next slide. So what are some of the questions? And Emily, were we going to go into a small group or just do these as a large group? To think about all these things that we've talked about, and in thinking about culture and its impact on college readiness and post-secondary readiness? What are some ways that we already help students develop their identity? And the flip of that is, what are some opportunities that may start to come to your mind that you have not yet capitalized on?
Maybe we could take a few responses or thoughts in the larger group and then break out again and take a look at the Rethinking Readiness tool. Does that sound good to you, Janelle?
Yeah, so we'll break out for the tool, but right now we'll just take some whole group comments. Anybody have some comments on these questions?
I might call out Lindsay if she is available to share what she shared earlier about one of the things that she was doing to help students develop their identity.
Did you call on me, Emily?
I did. I
Okay.
was wondering if you could share what you shared about some of the tools or approaches that you found helpful for developing identity.
Yeah, so I'm Lindsay, and I've had the unique opportunity to be a face-to-face school counselor for small schools, and I'm currently a virtual school counselor, and I'm also doing a little bit of consulting one-on-one on the side. And one of the things that has been a big difference for me is when you have the opportunity to have a small group or one-on-one with kids, starting with the personality exploration. And so I used 16 personalities as the initial assessment that I use with students. And then that gives us like a baseline exploration of behaviors of, hold on just a sorry about that, gives a baseline of like what behaviors these students already have within them that sort of make up their personality and how that is currently fitting in their life with peer relationships, family relationships, connection to school, performance in school. And so it gives us like a really broad place to start exploring about ourselves. We take that information and we move into career type assessments, and I use AKCIS for some of those. And one of them is instead of like, you had posted the question of like, or on one of the slides, it was like, how much money do you want to make? We take the reality check and we explore like the vision that the student has of how they see their life. And if they don't see it right in the future, that's okay too. And we talk about that, but we take the reality check assessment, and the kids love it because it's kind of fun to just see like what that point salary range is that they would, you know, need to make to live the lifestyle they want. And we connect that to the personality assessment. And then we also take a career interest inventory. And I think what's important that I tell them is that, you know, these assessments, although some of them are research-based, it doesn't mean that that's who they are, period. They're never changing. It's, hey, this is some information that you can take and begin to explore and see how it fits in your life now and how you can take that information and plan for the future. And so that's been probably the biggest eye opener for me. You know, I hadn't done that early in my career, and having done it later in my career and having them tie it back to the jobs they see in their community that they can come back and maybe be the next generation for, has really proved to be a successful start.
Thanks for sharing that, especially given that we just did a cold call on you. Appreciate that, Lindsay.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to share an example of how they're helping students develop their identity? I'm wondering in particular if anyone from Alaska Heritage might be interested in talking about the approach that you've taken as an organization.
I can share a few things. I think a lot of folks are familiar with our summer programming. So the camps, opening the box, the STEAM camps, the Slutzing hoop camp and running camp, and then TCLL. Yeah, and so most of those are either outside of school hours, or TCLL was at the beginning of the school day. But most of what I'm thinking of off the top of my head is outside of school hours. But a lot of a focus on traditional ways of living. You know, just like from starting at the basic clan structure, who's your family, where are you from, what, and then, you know, something I think that Lindsay mentioned, and maybe Emily, you mentioned too, like calling on your immediate supports, like reflecting on who those people are. But yeah.
Thanks, Alicia. That's a great example of just two different ways to help students, right? One is a one-on-one counselor situation. Another one is maybe not necessarily in the school setting, but helping to develop that sense of identity and who they are, where they're from, so that they can be grounded in where they're headed. So as you have both illustrated, helping youth reflect on their dimensions of identities so that they can be consistent with college going is a major kind of goal there. So I think it was maybe Gilbert who earlier shared that example where it felt inconsistent to be someone going off to college and a member of the community. So thinking about how we can reconcile those different identities, and there's strategies that can help do that through experiences, through programming that help address directly those beliefs and aspirations, and helping them align with their goals. Where do they want to go? What do they want? How can they contribute? And the dimensions of identity is just one of those exercises that counselors and teachers and program staff can use, where you're helping name, you know, who are you? You're a daughter, you're a student, you're a member of the tribe, you're a track star, you know, what are all the different identities you hold, and then reconcile them. This is one of my favorite quotes, that a lot of this work is just good SEL. And so many of us are already doing great social emotional learning work. And so this makes me feel really good about approaching schools to say, not, we need you to do this other thing, we want you to do this other initiative and this other program, but like, hey, it's really great what you're doing on that SEL piece. And, you know, let's think about maybe just a few ways that we can help link that to those future plans as well, to help reconcile, you know, what does this mean for you down the road? And where is it that you want to be headed? Janelle, I'll turn this back over to you.
Awesome. So I want to share part of what I've worked on in the past couple of years is some work around how schools might rethink their college readiness, particularly to reach Alaska Native students. And so I created a self-assessment, and the self-assessment has 18 questions. So if you can go to the next slide. The self-assessment is on a website. So the website is rethinkingreadiness.com, and I'm going to drop that in the chat. But on the what we're going to do today is just talk about the self-assessment itself. So the website itself has a lot more things on it. When I ended up taking all this research and I kind of got it down to the three categories we've been talking about: academic preparedness, cultural identity, and navigation skills. I have 6 questions for each. And when I put that in there, I realized to get to the deep questions that schools probably need to do in order to really think about their practices, each question needed a whole lot of information, or potentially needed more information in order to in order for people to understand the questions. And so on the website, and I think I won't go there, but on the website, if you do the online assessment, each question then links to a rubric, more information about the research and whatnot. But what we're going to do today is just explore a couple of questions from the rubric, just for you to get a flavor of what the kind of conversations might happen at a school site to start rethinking how they approach college readiness. So if we can go to the next slide. What's really important as you explore this tool is that it is not a tool meant to rate schools or to say you're good, you're bad, or that type of thing. The whole point of the tool itself is to get conversations going. And then once that happens, maybe choose 1 or 2 places to identify a place to work on. So next slide, please. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you kind of just a short, quick online version of the tool itself. So I just put that in the chat, and we're going to go into groups. And I actually have a third group that's green too. So we can have 3 groups. Group 1, you're going to do the pink highlighted questions. Group 2, the yellow. Group 3, you're going to do the green questions. And what that's going to allow you to do is the pink is going to do 1 question that's in academic preparedness, 1 question in cultural identity, and 1 question in navigation. Of course, you're not all at the same school, so you're not going to have the same kind of conversation as somebody at the same school, but hopefully you can just share some of your experience. We're not going to have time for you to go deep in these, so I suggest that you do 2 minutes for each question. We'll do about 6 minutes for the whole thing. And just get that experience.
And are folks able to open the link that Janelle put in there?
Okay. So again, group 1 is pink, group 2 is yellow, group 3 is green.
Sorry.
For a lot of schools, the academic preparedness one is the easiest one, so don't spend all your time there. Make sure you get the hard ones.
How long would you like, Janelle?
I think if we put 7 minutes on the clock, that gives people enough time. Everybody think about 2 minutes per question, and then that gives a little bit of cushion.
Okay. There are 3 rooms. Here we go.
Thanks, Pat. And Pat, you might need to hit launch or something along those lines.
Real quick.
There we go.
is
It's
it in
going.
the first tab or in the 4th tab?
Should be going there.
All right, Lubeth, you had a question?
Is this just in the first tab, the one labeled Healthy Schools? Or is it in the 4th tab labeled SERRC?
Yeah, I think just the first tab, the Healthy Schools tab. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Good question. Welcome back.
All right, welcome back. All right, so I know our group had a lot of great conversations. Is there any group that wanted to share any thought that they had? Was there any group that when you went down, you were like, oh yeah, we got this, we got this, we got this? Probably not. Any reflection statements anybody wants to share?
Maybe we could hear from one or two folks that haven't had a chance to speak to the group yet.
How about group 2? Will somebody from group 2 just share a little bit? Oh,
I can. This is Lindsay. So I was kind of the one that was in the schools in my group, and I was pointing out how using map data with NWEA. Well, first of all, we had the cultural question. We were the yellow group, and so I think we only made it on the first one that was talking about using data. And I pointed out how when schools use map data, which is the assessment by NWEA, it's really nice because it's a K-12 assessment that when used amongst a school, you take it 3 times a year, and it's got so many like ways that you can dial down to a student's area of weakness and create interventions for that. And as a student progresses through those testing points throughout their grade levels, once they hit like maybe 8th grade or earlier, maybe somebody can correct me, NWEA has aligned with ACT and SAT for projected scoring. So a student is able to know at a really early point in their academic career potentially what pace or track or goal strand they're on to achieve the score that they need to achieve, you know, for potential future opportunities. What I will say about that, though, is that post-secondary institutions no longer, some use that as a benchmark for admission. So that's not across the board. So it's kind of dependent on the student's post-secondary plan. But still, there is that data point to be able to use that for projected scoring. But again, culturally relevant with access issues, especially within the last 3 years. It's been super difficult to give students an equal opportunity to that assessment. So it's not a great measurement, but it is one that can be used.
Thanks, Lindsay.
But we had do the MAPS test, which is coming up here real soon, but not for identifying, who's going to be on whatever track of either college or voc-ed or what. But does help us to be able to, as a reference point with a number of other things to identify whether, like she said, the strengths and weaknesses. That way we could place a student better into a course that, they would have an opportunity to learn the particular skills they need to.
And I know we have a couple folks on from DEED here, and I know actually some of the state assessments will be changing. So I just want to open that up. If whether Sana or Supanika or Kate wanted to share any more about what might be coming ahead in terms of assessments. And I'm just learning about that too. So
I can share that.
okay.
So the state assessment is changing to the MAP assessment. And so, we will eventually, not this year, but we'll eventually be able to just do the 3 MAP assessment testing times and be able to accomplish our state testing in there. I think the real power for MAP, in my opinion is letting kids really monitor their own growth. So one of the things that you will hear in some of the research is some of our kids go off to college and they find that they need to be in remedial classes. And what they're most upset about is that nobody told them, you know, and it's like, man, I would have done something different if I understood this is where I was at. So I think, you know, there's a real power in involving kids in that process of self-monitoring, not so you can say, this is where you're at and that's your destiny, but this is where you're at. So what do you need to do to get a little bit higher next time and a little bit higher next time and a little bit higher next time? So.
That was my question, was how is this information being communicated with students?
Mm-hmm.
And is it happening?
First of all, I will completely agree with Janelle about finding out too late that is a situation kids are in college. And as a school counselor, that can be super frustrating too, because, you know, you have these conversations and then maybe there's all this hype and then they meet with their advisor and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Oh no, what happened? You know? And so that's awesome that the state is going to be using that. And to answer the question about like, how are students able to know? In the schools that I've worked in with MAP, many times there are growth charts in staff lounges that have students' identities kind of concealed that show like how kids are progressing through the grade levels. That information is also given at parent-teacher conferences. It's also, there's very detailed reports within the program. So, you know, hopefully within certain classrooms, teachers are educating them on how to read it. I know my kids come home and will tell me, oh, I scored 10 points below the writ norm, or, you know, 10 points above, and then they check with their friends. And so, you know, I think maybe the start of it is just having those peer conversations of like, what did you score? What did you score? And then that opens up larger conversations within the classroom. So a lot of goal setting happens around MAP as well, not only from the student level, but also the teacher level.
Yeah, and my school uses maps as well. And one of my favorite reports that comes in that is there's one called the student profile, and it actually has a colored chart in it. And so after maps, the kids all have their scores and they have no idea what they mean. And so I'll look it up. I'm like, okay, you're at this level and let's look where you're at on here. Hey, look, you went up. That's great. What happened? Or they might go down a little bit. And, you know, we talk about, was it a bad day? You know, what happened there? And they all want to be up in the green and the blues. They don't want to be down in the red and the yellows. And so they can all see where they're at and see their growth. And so I usually just, you know, it takes 5 seconds. You have them all in a class and you can switch between them pretty quickly and just say, hey, come look at your score real quick. This is what happened. And they all talk with each other like, I scored this throughout the whole time too. So
I have a discussion with my high schoolers and the junior high kids, and part of that discussion is the 100 level or below 100 level and exactly what that means. And we end up taking, because UAA, UAF, in the absence of ACT, and ACT is a mess right now, trying to scramble to get what we can for February. But it's part of the conversation that we have with the kids. And, you know, with the not the ACT, it's the AccuPlacer, and you know, now they want to write each sample with it, and the Alex math placement, and they know what that is all about. So it's not a big surprise by the time they're a senior. They know that they may have to take remedial courses, the below 100 level classes that don't add to the credit of towards their graduation.
Thanks for sharing those pieces. And I think that frustration about, wait, I didn't know that piece might have been one of the motivations behind thinking about a bridging framework. So Kate and Santa, I wanted to give you a heads up that in a minute I was going to open up the floor if you wanted to talk a little bit more about why you felt that might be a good thing to consider. And in terms of giving that feedback loop of how are students doing and how are they progressing, as we looked around to other examples of other communities that have managed to increase their post-secondary outcomes. We were looking at rural Tennessee, actually, where they went from about, I think if I have my numbers right, it was like 30% of their graduates were going off to college to about 80%. And that change just happened in a couple of years. And so we really wanted to know that they were doing that really changed those outcomes and they staying in college. I think that's the other piece too. It's not just go off and then, oh, that didn't work out back, but they were succeeding. And a big part of it was just that hands-on work with students, but also that very specific feedback. So, okay, it's time to take this step. This is how you're doing. This is what needs to happen. So thinking about those feedback loops, not just in a general way, but in a specific, tailored way.
And I think
so,
that, I think another opportunity is elementary schools in particular, and to some degree, middle schools, are all about that growth. High schools frequently are not. They're like, they think a kid comes in and then they're ready to track them on where you at. And what we miss is that we still have 4 years of academic growth that's possible. And what's so great about if it's a kid that does have some catch up is the norm line is slowing down. So, if you can really get some good catch up work in your high schools, you can take a kid that maybe entered as 9th grade with that ACT comparison saying they're going to have to take remedial classes, and you might get them up by their senior year to where they don't. But it is going to require some real targeted work on doing that. But I think that's an opportunity that sometimes high schools miss because we're not so used to looking at academic growth as elementary teachers.
So now that I gave you a little bit of a heads up, would either of you, Kate or Santa, like to talk a little bit about the bridging framework and kind of what the inspiration was behind saying, hey, maybe this is a thing that we should think about and share out with our schools?
Emily, I think they both had to.
Oh, yes, I see that now. As I was looking for their names, I was like, oh, never mind. Okay, so we'll keep moving. So as I was referencing, we've been working with the Commission on Postsecondary Education to think about what a framework might be to help more students move through this process. For my own self and in my own field of work, I stepped into my job 4 years ago and I was given this laundry list of 7 or 8 post-secondary solutions and supposed to try and move all of those pieces forward. And I honestly didn't understand how they all connected, right? Like, oh wait, are we supposed to be doing dual credit? Dual credit's gonna solve all our problems. Oh, okay, no, we're gonna do like summer programs. That's gonna be the thing. And so this is framework is a way for us and our schools and our communities to think about how do those components, those strategies work together? Where are our students finding that support? How are we fostering not just that academic piece and not just the navigation piece, but also being intentional about identity development and helping students foster that? And then how are we doing it, not just in the counselor's office, which I imagine a number of folks on this call can appreciate, like, I can't do it all. But
office would be nice. Right at the hallway or between the doors.
Oh boy. But how can we also be fostering some of this in our classrooms, in our families, in our community as a whole, and then also making sure that students are having experiences where they are building that belief in themselves and they're in an environment that reinforces what they might be hearing or doing. And then our leadership as well, thinking about our school boards, our superintendents and principals, what their role is in this. And then another key piece is just thinking about it starting earlier on. You know, oftentimes it's 11th, 12th grade. Okay, let's do this thing. And you know, I think folks on this call are pretty aware that a lot of that needs to be fostered earlier, even if it's not an overt conversation of what do you want to be when you grow up and where are you going to go to college. You don't necessarily need to be doing that work in 6th grade, but if you can be having conversations about where that student is from and who their family is, what their history is, and helping them get grounded in their own identity, who their community is, that builds a stronger foundation for them to think about who they are, who they want to be in the future, and start doing some of that exploration so that when they do get to 10th, 11th, 12th grade, they're ready to take action on more of those opportunities. So this matrix is a planning tool that we've been playing with and developing to think about all of those different places, the advisories, the classroom, what's happening in the family, and the environment, those experiences like internships and dual enrollment, what's happening in the community, so near peers, tribes, businesses, other entities that can play a role, and then the leadership. And then we kind of organized it by theme too, just to help take the load off and recognize that not everyone needs to do everything every year, but focusing in on what might be some key themes to focus in on in each year. And the other thing that we did was put together like an example of what might it look like if we could wave a magic wand at the magic school, a hypothetical school, and say, what does this look like? So it's, again, kind of a planning tool to map out what those activities might look like. And it's something that you might use as a team, your school team, a community team. So this is our drafty draft ideas. We'd love to stop share for a moment and actually put a copy of this in the chat so you can flip through it. We'd also love to know, what you think, what works about this, and what would you need to embark on some of these conversations? What would help you utilize this? There we go.
As Emily's getting up there, just a reflection that I think has been funny for me is as we've done this and, working with ACPE, and what we're learning from research is we really need a more holistic approach. What we need as practitioners and what we like is really linear to-do lists. And there's been a couple of times that people who've been working with us, have kind of pointed out our real attempt to make something that as soon as we force it into a linear do, it loses what it's meant to be to start with. So that's just been a really interesting thing to watch. And, every time that's been pointed out, I'm like, yeah, you're right. But it's such a great cultural observation of exactly what we're talking about. The practitioners in schools want and need kind of this structure, and the people we're serving are saying, then you're going to miss the mark, you know. And how do we dance back and forth so that we get that coverage? I think it's really interesting.
Well, the AKCIS has things for pre-K students all the way up. And that magic age or grade of 3 happens to be when most people make a determination about what they want to be in the future. So having those career opportunities for the very young, yeah, it has a big impact. It really does. And it's not just starting at 6th grade, that, you know, wherever they're at.
Skill, right?
I think too, as we think about that career exploration, inviting things in that we didn't realize were college ready or career exploration. I can think of an English teacher I have that took this to heart, and she just took, you know, the digital literacy standards and some of her English standards, and they always do this kind of cool project. And she's like, what if I switch this with who am I? And they're making these visuals and all of this. And then she kind of supports, you know, knowing who you are. She supports that concept of knowing who you are helps you make decisions for yourself in the future. And, you know, prior to this, we wouldn't have opened our eyes to, hey, that's actually supporting our college, our career goal stuff. We would have wanted to do a PowerPoint presentation about careers. And instead, it's now shifted to something different that is also powerful.
I'm curious if other folks have examples like that on how, whether it's within the community, within the school setting, been able to foster some of these conversations. The thing that comes to mind for me, I have 3 middle school kids actually, so this is near and dear to my heart, but to see some of the work that they're doing, whether it's an ancestry project, so it's a big kind of language arts, how to project management experience, but also in that they're doing a lot of conversations, really rich conversations about who is our family, where are we from? So that's a thing that they do in 6th grade that feels like very aligned with some of these goals, and it happens in the classroom. And then another thing that they do a little bit later, their courses are aligned with, rather than having a science course, it's an occupations and a humanities course. And so when they do their energy unit, they're looking at the world through the lens of what does it mean to be a petroleum engineer or work in renewable energy field. And so they're learning all about chemistry, or when they're doing their fisheries exploration, they're learning all about biology and those concepts. So they're accessing science, but it's through the lens of real life application, which I think also has created a hunger to learn more about chemistry or physics, because they can now see how it relates. And no one has said, do you want to, you know, what do you want to be? But they're thinking about it through that lens. Are there any other examples or anything else that folks wanted to share before we move towards our closing? Well, I'll also put a reflection sheet in the document if you do want to flip through the bridging framework and provide any feedback as we think about what this tool looks like. We'd sure appreciate that. But our kind of closing reflection question was, thinking of your school and your context, what is your next step? So if you can either put that in the chat or share it out. Thinking about your school and your context, what is your next step? Or your program, your department?
I'll share. I think I have a meeting with Lindsay on Friday, but I'm really excited about this work and to be developing and having some more tools that we can use. One thing that we're working on at SHI as a part of the Flexine initiative in post-secondary planning is developing personal learning plans that will implement first Yakusuke Dakahidi in the first year, and then ideally, I think, go to the other two high schools. But to start tracking from freshman year all the way through their high school career, just kind of everything that we've been talking about, an inventory of who they are, where they come from, what are their assets and strengths, and what are their dreams and goals, and how are we going to support them in their journey while we still have them in high school, and really emphasizing creating space for that during the school day, because we do have a lot of fabulous resources and services available outside of school hours, but I think we are aware that we're missing the mark and not creating more space for that during the school day.
It's really exciting, Alicia. How about for others? Either this is like your exit ticket. So they're in the chat or out loud. What's a next step that you're planning to take?
ACT, the testing, the parent involvement, especially with FAFSA and other things. I mean, it's all a challenge with, I've got, all my sites are closed except for like 3 to be able to access. It's like, I've got somebody there things too, but not sure what happens after I do. And, you know, having COVID as bad as it is out here in the Delta, sometimes we can invite the parents for things. Otherwise, goodness sakes, can't even get there for even the students. So we're trying to involve more family oriented involvement.
Thanks for sharing that. See a few pieces in the chat, figuring out how to get more time for program delivery, challenging each class to include one cultural or identity building unit. And please don't hesitate to keep sharing in the chat or online. If you'd like to dig into any of this more, some of these ideas are kind of a work in progress, and we'd love to continue to stay in touch. We also wanted to mention that there's an annual conference with Alaska Can. Mandy Savage-Romer will be one of the speakers there. She was someone who we mentioned a number of times tonight, and it's a great statewide opportunity to connect and think about these issues together. So that's March 1st to 3rd. And this is how you can get in touch with Janelle or myself. And we really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle and Emily. I got a sneak peek on this before, and it's really smart stuff. And there's a reason why we're having it on the School Health Learning Collaborative, because this is really, you know, thinking about health and your connection to social emotional learning, and it's just great work. And I agree. I think it's the piece that we need to build out. Not just for career, but just for health in general. So thank you. I think we should all go home or step away from your desk to the other part of your home.
And just thanks again for everybody's patience with my being late.
And I apologize too. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.